Red Dragon, yo. Do we need to make some Firebird content?
All right, what's up guys? So today I am replacing the rear dust shields from my 2017 M3. So I'm gonna go through the whole process, removing everything, getting the old ones out, putting the new ones back in. But first, figured I would talk about, real quick, what are dust shields? Why do they need to be replaced? Is this something you should actually do? Okay, so first of all, what are dust shields? So these are, hey camera guy, can you hand me a dust shield? You're the best. Okay, so these are dust shields. And so this is a fixed metal disc that goes behind the wheel. They're actually all four, but we're only worrying about the back ones. So fixed metal disc that sits behind your rotor, and it's bolted onto the hub with these there's like four 10 mil bolts that go in here. And so they're generally there to protect the elements behind the wheel, well, to protect the components behind the wheel from the elements, mostly like water and any kind of mud, I guess, stuff like that. However, problem is that, and by the way, I'm only talking about F8X cars, so this might apply to F30s or other models in general, I'm not really sure. I only know what I've researched about the F8X cars. So, problem is, and why we're replacing these today, is that from 2015 to 2017, these things had something of a design flaw, where because of the original design, actually, can you hand me the original design? Because I've already done this. On the one side, just to get the feasibility of this project, just to kind of see what I'm working with here. So this is the original one. And so the problem is that the rotor, well, this was bigger than the rotor, and it would allow elements from the road to kick up, like gravel, little stones, asphalt, stuff like that. So these little pebbles would come in, and again, the dust shield is like a fixed item, and then you have the spinning rotor. So these little pebbles would get caught in between them, and they would make this terrible, like screeching, horrible squealing sound, right? And so over time, you could just maybe have one or two get in there. Sometimes you can have debris just build up, which actually increases the chances that more pebbles can get caught up in there. And the crappy thing is that you'd actually, when you hear it, usually you hear it get stuck like closer to the center, and then you can kind of hear it like spin, and it would hear like this clunking sound, almost like it had been ejected out, like it had made its way out, only to find that really it probably just found like a pocket to get reintroduced later when you hit like a bump or something like that, right? So anyway, from 2015 to 2017, these were what were on the F8X cars. In fact, if you go on like Beamer Post and look up, what is it? Brake shields or dust shields, you can find posts going all the way back from like a month or two after people were getting their F80s, F82s. So like, was it like September, October of 2014? And see people complaining about these, right? So this has been an issue. In 2018, they finally updated them to this design. Help brother out, thank you. So they updated them to this design. And so these are, it's kind of hard to tell unless you compare them up close, but these are a little bit smaller, so they can form right to the edge of the rotor. And then they also have this little flange here, or lip or whatever, which I guess is meant to like deflect would-be stones or little pebbles that would get caught in here. So again, this is a 2017. I've had the issue with these things happening almost since I had the car. At one point when I was having the rear tires replaced, the dealer had noted that there was a buildup of some debris back there, and they cleared it out. About a year later, it was happening again. We also have the 2018 M3 Nardo, and so that has the updated design, and we've had that car for almost a year and a half, have not had the issue happen. So I would venture to say that the new design, pretty effective. So those are what the dust shields are. That is why you might want to replace them. Now, as to whether or not you should do this job, well, I actually thought this was a little bit easier than it was. I mean, you do have to take the calipers off, you gotta take the rotor off and everything. The problem is that to install these, as you can see, there's a very thin, kind of weak piece of metal here. Like the whole disc is, not that rigid. But this here, when you take everything off to get these on, you actually have to slide them forward on instead of being able to kind of angle them from the back, because there's a little piece of metal here. Well, in order to do that, you have to take the entire hub assembly off. The problem with that is that you need a, what is it, like a press, like a bearing press or something in order to get it off, which most people don't have. I don't have one, nor would I know what to do with one if I had it. So I was kind of reluctant to end up doing this, only because I don't generally like, if I'm gonna install something, I don't like to do like hacky workaround type things. It's not half-assing, because half-assing is you could have done something better, you just chose not to. But like a hacky workaround, in this case, To get these on, you have to cut them if you don't have a bearing press or access to one. And so I was kind of reluctant to do that, but ultimately figured it was worth doing. Just because, you know, really just getting rid of this piece of metal here, you're not really jeopardizing the structural integrity of this thing. Again, it is bolted to the hub with these 4 bolts here, and it's stiff enough. I just didn't like the idea of like cutting something to install it when it should, you know, go on a certain way, but I kind of got over myself, installed it on the one side, and it really wasn't that bad. Now, as an alternative to this, if you were having this issue where you were frequently getting stuff caught in between your rotor and dust shield, but you don't want to do this installation, 2 things. One, last time I was having this issue, and well, before I've updated these, I found that if you just put your hands through, you don't have to take the wheel off or anything, if you just put your hands through the spokes in your wheel and just kind of flex the dust shield a little bit, just go all the way around, chances are whatever's stuck there will just drop out. I was having the problem on the driver's side most of all, and it was happening like probably every other time I was taking the car out. It was just awful. After finally, I just went to go try to flex the dust shield to see if maybe they would just fall out, and sure enough, like 5 or 6 little pebbles dropped out, and I have not had the issue happen again. Given that though, I still wanted to replace these just because it eventually will happen again. Again, I had these cleaned out from the dealership like right after I got my car, and it eventually will happen again. The other thing you can do is just take the wheel off if you find that if you have the issue and you're pushing against the dust shield and you don't get any results, you can take the wheel off and just get an air compressor and just shoot that up in between the dust shield and the rotor, and that will probably clear everything out as well. But you know, again, got these already. I actually ordered the set from FCP Euro. Turns out they were the wrong ones. I could have sworn I ordered the right part number, but they were the wrong ones. So I sent them back and got the right ones from ECS Tuning. So I'll link these in the description below, of course, with all the tools and parts that we use. And again, up to your own discretion if you want to do this. I'm just putting this video out here as sort of like a walkthrough just to see how it's done. But you know, up to you if you're having this issue and this is something you want to do. So, all right, with that, I think I covered everything. So let's go ahead and look at all of the tools that are going to be needed to do this, and then we will go ahead with the installation. Okay, so here are all the tools that I'm going to use for this job, starting with the 17mm socket. So this is for your lug nuts. And when putting these back on, I'll tighten these to 105 foot-pounds. 18mm socket for the caliper carry bolts, and when that gets reinstalled, that gets 110 Newton meters. And those are on really, really tightly, so I highly recommend if you're doing this to use some kind of a breaker bar because just trying to loosen them with the socket is extremely difficult. 10mm socket for the dust shield bolts. I've read these get tightened to 9 foot-pounds. My torque wrench, I think, starts at 14.8, so I hand tighten these to close that level. A 5mm Allen, so this is for the parking brake screw, and those just get removed with a 1/4 turn. 6mm Allen, and this is for the rotor bolts, and those get tightened to 16 Newton meters. All right, next we've got the punch tool. So this for removing the caliper pins. And you know, whenever I have the opportunity to clean something up a little bit, I try to do that. So with the caliper pins out, got some steel wool to clean them up, and then silicone paste as I'll coat the caliper pins when reinstalling them. Got some metal shears here for cutting the old and new dust shields. Piston spreader. Don't really need one of these, but it does make life easier if you have to remove your brake pads. And so if you don't have one or you don't want to buy one, then just like a flathead screwdriver does just as well. Wire brush. So again, if given the opportunity, I like to try to clean things up a little bit, and with these cars, the rear wheel, well, all the wheels actually, they trap a lot of moisture. So usually when you take the wheels off, and particularly the rotors, there's usually a lot of rust and just debris and dirt and stuff like that. So wire brush to clean things up is a good idea to have. Ball peen hammer, so if you've not taken your rotors off, they will probably be a little bit fused to the hub, so a couple of taps on the rotor hat with the round end of the hammer will be very helpful. Anti-seize paste, so when putting the brake pads back in, I like to put a little bit on the sides and the metal back before reinstalling them. Breaker bars here, some gloves because I'll be working with cut metal, and also they're kind of helpful for when you need to move the parking brake shoes out of the way. And finally, impact wrench because they just make life easier. And actually not finally, now finally, some shop towels just because this is a really messy job. By the way guys, if you do not have wheel studs, they really come in handy. So we got punch tool, remove the caliper pins, get the bracket out, then we'll remove the carry bolts, get the caliper all the way off. All right, that's one. What's this thing called again?
Clip?
Caliper, clip,
Something.
brace,
Yeah.
whatever. And the other one out. And we'll clean these up when we go reinstall them, but yes, they are pretty dirty, which is why we have the steel wool and the silicone paste to put them back in. You do not need a piston spreader to do this, but it does make life very easy. Yo, what is Rex's problem?
Yeah, you hear that? Good lord.
All right, so then you also want to undo the brake line cap off the caliper. So that, actually, no, sorry, this one, you only need to do that on the rear passenger side. This side does not have the brake sensor. So on the rear passenger side, you have a brake sensor. So you would want to undo the brake line plug from the caliper. So that you could remove the wire from it, but then also reroute it. But you don't need to do that. All right, next part is kind of the crappy part, and that is breaking the caliper carry bolts. And these things are super tight. So I was not able to do this with the leverage from just having my car on jack stands. Maybe if it was a little bit higher, or if you actually had it on a proper jack, it would be easier. However, I'm going to be using a breaker bar to do that. So get an 18 mil socket. And I have this small bar here, and actually how I did this last time. So this bolt is gonna be right back here, physically, obviously on the caliper, but it's a little bit further in. And then so with the subframe right here, I'm actually just going to put the breaker bar, I don't know if this is the best method, between here, because that gives you enough leverage to break this bolt. There you go. So yes, on the passenger side, you're actually gonna go down to break it, and on the driver's side, you're gonna go up to break it. I'm also kind of concerned about the brake line here because I didn't want it to slip and potentially cause an issue with the brake line. Call that an abundance of caution, but look at that monster. So when you put these back in, they have to be tightened to 110 Newton meters. And you know what, I'm pretty sure I do a fair amount of research to make sure that all of the torque specs that I cite are correct, but as always, I would highly recommend that you do your own research and verification because I am by no means an expert mechanic and I could be wrong, but I think they're right. All right, so just so you guys can see what I'm doing a little bit better up close. So I have the socket here. And so I just ran the breaker bar underneath the socket through here, just to pull up, just to get enough leverage as the caliper is falling out, but just to get enough leverage to be able to break that bolt, because again, it is on there super tight. All right, other bolt is free. Now at this point, you know, they always say that you can hang the caliper from the suspension with a bungee cable or something like that, and that does work great, but I happen to have this very perfectly sized Amazon box, so I am just gonna let my caliper rest on the Amazon box. That way I don't really have to worry about stringing it up or angling it the right way. Still got plenty of give for the brake line, so we're good. So that is the second hardest part is done, which is just getting the caliper off, just because it's kind of annoying. So, all right, I have spacers, so I have to remove that. Okay, spacers off. I forgot that the Allen sockets use the medium. Appreciate you. And could you hand me my beer, please? All right, so next up, if you have a wheel spacer, take that off. However, if you have wheel studs, you do not need to remove them because removing the rotor and the rotor hat will just it'll just slide straight out. To start, make sure that you have the parking brake engaged so that you can undo these two 6mm Allen bolts. And then after those bolts are out, make sure you release the parking brake so that you can actually remove the rotor. And don't forget to re-engage the parking brake before taking your car off of the jack stands or lift or whatever. Well, if it's a lift, it probably doesn't matter, but jack stands matters. By the way, with the rotor bolts, so I have seen, I think, in BMW technical manuals saying that these are to get replaced. However, there is a video out there from FCP Euro where they do a rotor replacement, and the guy clearly states that these bolts can be reused. So I feel reasonably confident about putting them back in, but they are pretty cheap if you wanted to replace them. Knew that was gonna happen. Right against the wheel stud, that was not fun. You know, this is where gloves would be smart. Did I already say we should get some Firebird content on here?
You did say that.
I did say that. Yo, it's crazy how like clean inside the, inside these, whatever.
Threads.
Yes, thank you. Inside the threads look, as opposed to all this. I don't know if I can zoom in on this, but actually here. So man, check out how clean inside those threads look. In fact, let's back up and zoom in. And then you've got all that rust and grossness. So I'm gonna clean all that up before I put everything back together, but just so you can see what it's doing. Pretty sick, Lise. All right, will this come right off? Of course not. Will it even turn? You did pull the emergency brake, right?
Yes.
You couldn't have.
I did, because you got those bolts off.
Double check. I bet you it's not.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, the parking brake is engaged.
So unengage it.
Could have just asked.
That's what I was asking. I said, did you engage it? Or did you disengage it? I'm sorry. Okay.
Now it's engaged.
Now it's disengaged. So look at that spinny wonderfulness. But will it come off? Look at that, didn't even have to use a hammer. But if you find that yours are super stuck, just take the ball end of the hammer, just a couple of taps around the rotor hat, and it should come right off. Oh yeah, the bubble wrap.
Bubble wrap.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Got some bubble wrap. All right, that's coming off. And by the way, when I did this on the other side, I very, very stupidly and ill-advisedly. So like, obviously the car's stuck in this position, so if I'm gonna take the wire brush and clean all this stuff off, you know, I'm gonna have to do it here. But to clean the rotor, you can take it away so that it doesn't add just to the debris this environment can incur. So next, gotta take a 5mm Allen and do a quarter turn on these two parking brake screws. And that's just gonna make it so that these loosen up and we can kind of pull them out of the way a little bit. And then there are 4 10mm bolts that hold the parking brake disc and the dust shield in place to the hub. So we'll be able to free up all this stuff because then we have to cut into the dust shield in order to remove it. First up, quarter turn on this. And because this is a spring, you kind of want to push in and then do your turn. Otherwise it's gonna pop and it won't be anything bad, but it's a little startling. Am I missing this? Did I overturn it? There you go. All right, so that is one. Then you got one on the bottom here, also gets a quarter turn. There you go. Okay, so before you go moving the parking brake shoes, you wanna use lift it up a little bit, and that'll give you access to the 2 10mm bolts on the top, and then you can move it down, and that'll give you access to the bottom ones. Let's first remove dust shield bolts. Oops. All right, one bolt. All right, top ones are out. Now I just gotta get access to the bottom ones so you can shift the parking brake shoes down and reach the bottom ones. All right, all 4 bolts out. Now you can kind of finagle the parking brake shoes out of the way a little bit just to give you some room. All right, so from here, get these out of the way. Now you have the parking brake disc. So if you're doing this, right? So what we're gonna do at this point is cut the dust shields here and here because like I showed earlier, is that thin metal strip that connects them, right? Or that makes this a full connection. So we're gonna cut that out so that we can just literally rip this out of the way. However, if you are doing this, you wanna be super careful that you do not cut the parking brake disc, because the parking brake disc is a much smaller disc that sits right in between these parking brake shoes and the dust shield. And they're kind of close to each other, which is why you sort of pull this out a little bit to give yourself room so that you can get the parking brake disc out of the way and then get access to the dust shield. And if I didn't know better, oh, okay, there it is. I was gonna say that already looks cut, but no, I see it. All right, now, another thing. For this section, gonna enlist the help of the kid, my son. It's because he did the other side, did it flawlessly, and I don't see a reason to mess with perfection. So I'm gonna hop out and let him take over.
So, what you're gonna wanna do when you wanna take these shields out is make sure that you're not messing with this plate here. There's a little plate that sits behind the parking brake. That's not related to the dust shield. That's something completely different. However, as we had here with the new ones, there's this tab here that sits behind that. What you're gonna wanna do is you're gonna wanna cut right where that metal gets thin. So you don't have to cut through a whole lot of material and you'll break that seal. So this is gonna take a good bit of messing with, but it's most certainly doable. I'm a little uncomfortable with how long it took me the first time. All right. So you're gonna wanna put your shears in, if you can, to a spot right there. Make sure your back plate is out of the way, and snip one. So now we want to do the bottom one. Now if it makes it any easier for you, you can go underneath the car here and look for that spot. You can even try cutting it from there if it's a little bit easier. I find it easier to just cut it up from here and kind of do some of the guesswork. Since you're taking out the dust shields, it doesn't really matter if you butcher them, but the cleaner it is, the cleaner it'll be to get off. Just a little bit further. And I think that's it. Yep. There you go. There is your metal piece that you've just snipped off the brake shield. So, what you're gonna wanna do is you're gonna wanna try and get this plate out this way, because you've cut a hole here, so you can just, boom. And you're just gonna wanna try and shift it and shimmy it off of the hub. So we're gonna try and do that. And there's your dust shield.
Champion.
So that was actually a much cleaner cut than the first one. So what we have here is the new dust shield. Now what I've gone and done is I've Sharpied where you're gonna wanna cut. Now I've found that it's easiest and least tense, I guess you could say, if you cut it from where these lines follow. So you can see where the Sharpie is, that they just kind of follow the contours of just going straight back. I'm gonna cut these and then I'm gonna hand the show back to the old man because he's the one who put these things back on. You wanna go ahead there? There you go. And also what you might wanna do, just for your own safety, is get just a low grit sandpaper and just sand the edges off so it's not really, really sharp. And that'll be a lot easier to handle. So for this part, you do cut a tiny little part of the flange. It's negligible, but it's still there. And since it's a rounded piece, it makes it a little bit harder to cut because there's more material in the way. But overall, it's not too bad. Oh, come on. So, it doesn't have to be pretty. You'll never see it. It's just so there's no sharp edges because we don't like sharp edges. I've got a little extra nick here that I'm gonna cut out here. Again, doesn't have to be perfect. All right, that'll work fine. So, if you'd like to bring that a little bit closer.
Yeah, let's get a look at this here.
Yeah.
All right, here's our after cuts made.
And if you'd like to look here as well, that the difference of the cuts that you make to get it off and get it back on are pretty much the same.
They're almost identical.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Awesome.
All right, I will hand this back to you so you can get these new dust shields on.
All right, so now, before we get everything put back in place, now is a good opportunity to clean up a little bit. So get that wire brush, clean up all in here. As you can see, like literally the stuff just plucks right off. So I'm gonna clean up this hub assembly and the rotor a little bit, and then we'll finish up.
Here's how dirty this assembly is. See all this grime. Of course, this does make this a lot harder with the wheel studs in place. Otherwise, you'd be able to get here a little bit more easily, but it's way more of a pain to remove these, so we'll just leave them in place.
All right, so I think most of the stuff has been cleaned up in here. So now I'm just gonna take the rotor outside, kind of clean that up a little bit, and then we will get everything put back to, actually, then we'll get the new dust shield on, then we'll get everything put back together. All right. So one other thing that's good to have is some brake cleaner. I forgot to mention this in the tools and parts section. Again, you don't need it, but if you are cleaning up components back here, not a bad thing to have. All right, so now to fit the new dust shield on. This will take a little coercion to kind of get it in place, but if it's anything like the last one, it's not that difficult. Although again, you want to try to bend it. Actually, you're going to go this way. And by the way, if you do these are marked which side, because you have a left and a right side one, right? So this, you want to try to get it in place, not really bend side to side too much. There we go. Almost. Woo. Finally. All right, so once this is in place, you can immediately see where the holes line up. So line that up. The parking brake disc also lines up right there. And so these two will go back in. You'll reinstall the 4 10mm bolts. They'll go right through here. And then parking brake can go back in place. Now, you can kind of probably get your socket back here, but I think it's easier just to kind of slightly resituate the parking brake and then put everything in the same way you took them off. Okay, real quick, also, if you cannot start these, if you cannot get them started, just be super careful when doing them with the socket that you don't cross-thread them. And as they are getting tighter, you'll clearly hear them change pitch. So if it is getting tight and you don't hear the pitch change, you might wanna reverse that out. All right, so let's get this parking brake assembly put back together. So these two parts line up here. And then angle this so that you can get the top and bottom screws back in place. These go in with the 5mm Allen, quarter turn. All right, now the bottom one. All right guys, so from this point, the parking brake assembly is back on, the dust shield is on, everything is good to go. So now it is time to put the rotor back on, the cleaned rotor, get the calipers back on, and button everything up. So So we can try to remember the way that you had this installed. It's always helpful. That looks about right. Notice how much, well, yeah, from this angle you can see how much closer this is to the rotor. So this will much better prevent rocks from getting in. And like I said, you have the flange here that should deflect rocks because this space is occupied by the caliper. Also a good idea. Spin, make sure that you don't hear any obvious rubbing. Make sure this isn't like bent or anything. Sounds good. All right, so rotor is back on. So we're gonna tighten the rotor bolts, but before that, let's pull the parking brake and make sure the parking brake still engages. And if it does, we should not be able to pull the rotor back off. All right, locked. Good to go. All right, so let's get these 6mm Allen bolts started by hand. Again, the lowest mine goes is 20 Newton meters, so going for 16, just gonna try to watch the gauge. All right, rotor is secure. Next step, putting the caliper back on. So for this, now getting these carry bolts on, kind of a pain. So let's get this back in place. All right, now the fun part is tightening those carrier bolts to 110 Newton meters. Ah, God, that's hard. Woo. Awesome. All right, so the hard part is done. So now we just get the brake pads and caliper pins back in. Hit those with a little bit of anti-seize and the pins with silicone paste, and then get the spacer back on, get the wheel back on, tightened up, and we are done. So for these, just put a tiny bit on the side. And a little dab right in the center on the back. Not on the brake pad section. And then also, don't forget to clean off the caliper pins. Before and after, worth doing. All right, then a little bit of silicone paste on the pins. Incidentally, goes straight in like that. So this curved side is down. All right, we'll tap these pins in. Pins are back in. And then finally, let's get the spacer back on. I didn't clean this up very well. Then a little bit of anti-seize on this. Just on the edge of the thing here. You know, one of the first places that I ever saw about putting anti-seize on when putting on the spacer suggested putting it on, like coat it all in between the rotor hat here. But then I've seen just as many, if not more places where they only put a little bit on the edge of the tabs here. So been doing this since and I haven't had a problem, so I'm gonna go with that. Done, let's get the wheel back on. The cleanup sucks, honestly. That's gonna be the worst part. Cleaning all this crap up. And then the very last step, torque all of these down to 105 foot-pounds. All right, guys, well, that is the dust shield replacement. So hopefully this was helpful to somebody out there. I can't imagine too many people are finding themselves in the position to do this replacement, but then again, there were a lot of F8X cards sold between 2015 and 2017, and I imagine a good cross-section of those are people who are DIYers who may want to fix this. But again, even if you don't, just flexing that dust shield occasionally if you run into this problem, and using that as a method to get some of the debris to fall out does work reasonably well. I think it's kind of more or less a stopgap, because even doing that, the problem will come back again. But in any case, so yeah, I hope somebody found this helpful. If you did, feel free to give it a thumbs up, and subscribe if you haven't already. A lot more F80 content coming soon. So in the meantime, I will catch you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.